The outbreak of war in the Indo-Pacific is an all-too-real possibility. That's the stark warning in a special report for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Report author William Leben sets out that growing mistrust and competition between regional powers, in particular the US and China, highlights miscalculation risk. He joins me now in the studio. Thanks for your time. Probably the most likely flashpoint is over Taiwan. How would you describe how a sort of miscalculation turns into much worse, as an example?
Sure, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. We tend to use quite anodyne language when we're discussing these things. We throw around words like deterrence around a great deal. That kind of hides how things are likely to play out on the ground or on the water or around a table. I'm thinking of, for instance, National Cabinet.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say National Cabinet, National Security Committee, I should say. And these things are often far less controllable than we would like to think. So, for instance, were there to be a diplomatic crisis, different nations in the region moving warships into contested space, accidents are prone to happen, and in that heightened psychological environment, the possibility of miscalculation and misreading signals and acting early on an error is very real.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of actual examples, I'm thinking of all the different laser pointing lately. Maybe there's a warning shot that's fired off that accidentally hits a vessel and then someone responds and suddenly you've got US and Chinese defence forces firing at each other. Is that the fear, and someone in charge releases a sort of larger weapon and then it's on?
Absolutely, but it ranges much wider than that. So the risks really span genuine accidents, things like misreading of or misuse of a laser potentially on an unauthorised basis, through to the deliberate use of force, be it by China, be it by the US, be it by an allied country in the region for a local crisis. And then the pressures to respond or to misread the intentions behind that use of force, which may have been intended in quite a local way, might be really significant. And then, as the parlance would be, the temptation to climb up the escalation ladder.
They don't want to be seen as weak, they respond and then it escalates. So one of the things you've called for is a so-called red phone. That would involve, what is it, leader to leader, or maybe military leader to military leader, where they can just pick it up and instantly go, hey, what's going on? Tell us.
Absolutely. So there's a broad umbrella of crisis dialogue mechanisms, we might say, that range from that leader-to-leader red phone mechanism between, say, the American and the Chinese president or other national leaders in the region. But also at an operational level, those mechanisms are really important. So clarity in ambiguous circumstances can be sought, as well as rules of the road mechanisms, which have kind of an ongoing or longer view approach to managing these risks. The Royal Australian Navy actually has played a significant role in developing one of these, which is in force at the moment, called CUES. An agreement to mitigate the risk of accidents and miscalculations at sea. So we have a pedigree in playing a constructive role in these kind of mechanisms, and the Australian government has certainly shown interest in doing so to a greater extent.
In reading this today, I was reminded of the story from the Cold War. There was a Russian submariner, Arkhipov, who basically was said to have stopped the Cold War escalating, becoming a hot war. There was a sub on its way to Cuba. It was a Russian sub and it was getting attacked by American forces. And the head of that sub wanted to just fire a nuclear warhead. He was so frazzled, and Arkhipov was too IC, and he said, no, we're not doing it. But they had authority to, if they couldn't get contact with Moscow. Do we have better checks and balances now? Because, if Arkhipov wasn't there, suddenly the Cold War becomes a hot one. Is there better chains of command now where someone, if they're going to fire off a major weapon, can't just do it if they're feeling the moment on a ship or whatever it might be?
Well, you would like to think so. It goes without saying that the nuclear powers in the region, most significantly China and the United States, everything to do with the command and control of their forces are necessarily quite opaque to outsiders and even to close allies. But certainly there's been a lot of preoccupation with those lessons over time. The Cuban crisis is obviously one of the most studied examples of that across history. And that flows the other way as well, right? Not just on the Soviet side of the equation. Kennedy was reportedly horrified when he realised practice depth charges were being dropped to try to bring a submarine to
spark the incident in the first place.
And those actions can be taken through good faith.
Okay.
And an understanding or a misunderstanding of orders which was not intended to be malicious but can have disastrous effects.
William Leben, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.